Well, this is Dr. Stan here at Radio Liberty, coming to you from the hills overlooking beautiful and picturesque Monterey Bay and bringing you the news behind the news, the story behind the story. Hoping to convince you that reality is usually scoffed at, that illusion is usually king. But in the battle for the survival of Christian civilization, it's going to be reality and not illusion or delusion that will determine what the future will bring. And I need to remind you the views expressed here are not necessarily those of the owners, management, staff, sponsors, or supporters of the station you're listening to. They happen to be my views, and, well, for the next hour, they're going to be the views of Dr. Dennis Cuddy. Dr. Cuddy, thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And what are we going to be talking about this afternoon?
Well, it's the book I did that was carried by Radio Liberty, the Power Elite, Their History and Future. And we are picking up with the chapter that's called The Power Elite's Use of Misdirection, which is sort of a follow-on to the previous chapter, which is the psychological conditioning of Americans. But as usual, I like to give a few comments on matters of contemporary interest in the news. And there's actually a number of them this time. But I think it's important to do this because my books are not only about the history and where this plot, as it were, came from and how it's been very, very well organized over many, many centuries. But the whole purpose in doing that is to connect it to where we are and where we're headed. A lot of people do historical research, period. A lot of people just sort of guess at what the future has to hold. And a lot of people can offer remarks about what's going on today and what they think about it. The trick, as it were, and what I try to do is combine all three because I believe only in that way does it all sort of make sense and has some purpose. I used to teach history in the public schools, and I myself, when I was in college, preparing to be basically a history teacher, wondered, like most people did, I guess, young people, why am I doing this? I mean, who cares about somebody, memorizing a date that somebody made the Louisiana, Jefferson made the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, big whoop, who cares? It's done. And that's nice. I mean, it's sort of nice if you know it, but if you don't, don't worry about it. You still get up tomorrow and, go to work and make some money and eat, watch ball games or whatever you do. But there's a lot more to what I call history, and it's combined with all of these other things. The history is combined with current events. It's combined with future forecasting. It's combined with this whole plot that's been in operation for many centuries. Oftentimes we just pick up with Cecil Rhodes about 100 years ago, but it goes way back before then. I mean, Cecil Rhodes just didn't pop up out of nowhere and say, hey, I think I'll take over the world. I have nothing better to do today. And so even Cecil Rhodes is a product of a long train of events that began centuries, literally centuries before. I mean, you can go back many centuries if you want to, but I usually don't do that much. I go back about 1,000 years or so and quickly move to where this is all leading today. So anyway, I try to give a few remarks on contemporary events because, as I've said a number of times, it's like piecing together a puzzle. You'll have these gaps, and all of a sudden you'll see this little part to a puzzle in, say, 1863 or, whatever the date is. You say, aha, now I see how what happened in the first half of the 1800s connected to the last half of the 1800s and how it is all part of this plan, which when you put the puzzle together, you can see it. You can see it, but otherwise you're just looking at isolated events and it doesn't make sense sometimes. And so that's why I encourage people, when things don't make sense, look at it from the perspective of how does it help the Power Elite's ultimate goal, which is develop a world government, a world socialist government, and we'll pick up after the break.
All right, fine. I think it's so vitally important people understand this is the major goal. And when you say socialism, it doesn't mean that this is going to be something where you have equality and freedom and government provides for you. It means a totalitarian regime under a ruling elite. They know exactly what they're doing, and of course have been planning this a long time. Well, this is Dr. Stan. I guess this afternoon, Dr. Dennis Cuddy, who's taught history. And basically, we're going to be talking certainly about the background of what's going on today. And that basically there's been a plan going back certainly through the millennium to bring about a one-world government. And yet, of course, this whole plan is coming to its fulfillment today as we're watching this whole thing unfold. And nothing that you see is as it appears to be. Certainly, we see the riots over there in the Ukraine, and basically, of course, there's something about the people over there wanting freedom or not liking the ruler. Basically, of course, this is being backed on one side by Russia, on the other side by the United States, and yet they're both working together for this common goal. The average person involved in these revolutionary movements has no idea what it's all about. He may be killed, he may suddenly lose his home, there will be all sorts of violence, but all of this is being manipulated. It's the most magnificent put on of all time as we move progressively towards a one-world government and a one-world financial system and a one-world religion, because this is all certainly centered around the destruction of Christianity. Dr. Cuddy, you pick up the story.
Okay. Before I continue with what I was going to say about recent events and what's going on, I'll pick up on what you just said about the events over in the Ukraine. Oftentimes, as I said last week and many times before, there are psychological probes. The power elite wants to see just how stupid it has been allowed to make the public, wherever they are, with the Ukraine, the U.S., England, doesn't matter. And so this is, I think, one of the psychological probes of the, as they call them, freedom fighters in the Ukraine. They're counting on the Ukrainians to have been dumbed down sufficiently, just like they've dumbed down Americans and many other people, so that what they might be doing, I'm not saying this is for sure what's going on, but if anybody knows anybody in the Ukraine and they want to pass this on to them, I would highly recommend that you do this. Because many, many years ago, about 100 years ago, you had Lenin, and what they would do is they would have the secret police go around and round people up at night. You know, they knock on the door, they're half asleep, and drag them out, and off they would go to disappear into some gulag in Siberia. Well, they had been dumbing the people around the world down pretty well, and so we'll get more recently, quickly, let's run forward up to Tiananmen Square. And so the Chinese, figuring the people of China had been sufficiently kept in the dark or made dumb that they couldn't use their brains. Remember, all of this was changed from the cognitive thinking.
Hold that thought. We'll be back in a moment. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and certainly Dr. Cuddy is talking about what's going on over in the Ukraine, but what's going on in the Ukraine and Kiev today is simply a manifestation of what's been going on for a long period of time. There is certainly an intellectual elite.
KKMC is not connected.
Okay, there is certainly an intellectual elite that are running things throughout the world, and they're constantly manipulating the people. You go right ahead, Dennis.
Okay, so what they did at Tiananmen Square is now remember, this is the extremely large and ruthless communist Chinese government who can really, you know, roll a bunch of tanks and shoot a bunch of bullets and kill everybody immediately whenever they want to. But they didn't do that at Tiananmen Square. They allowed this demonstration and this, Statue of Liberty, sort of their mock-up of it, to be hauled out there in the Tiananmen Square. And a few people came out, maybe 1,000 or so, and then it went on for a day, and so a lot of other people said, hey, look, looks like freedom's in the air, we'll join in. And so they join in, and hooray, hooray, and then there's tens of thousands, and everything is hunky-dory, right? Then all of a sudden, here come the tanks and the whole bit. Now, the tanks do get a little ruthless. They do a little bit of, killing. There is some bloodshed. But for the most part, at Tiananmen Square, the Communist Chinese know that the foreign press is there watching this stuff and filming it, right? So they don't want to just roll in and have blood all over every place, 100,000 people's crushed bodies laying there for everybody to see. So very, very quietly, what happens is, by the third day, what they've done is they've had enough time, the Chinese communist intelligence agents, to mingle with the crowd, right? And from buildings sitting above the crowd to take photographs. So by the third day, what they have is a pretty good idea of who all the leaders are and who all the really strong advocates are and who are the just sort of bystanders, standing at the edges saying, isn't this interesting? And so everything is just sort of quietly, it goes down. And, of course, people have to rest. I mean, you can't be out there 24 hours a day jumping up and down, right? And so after the third day, what the Chinese thought was, hey, it looks like, things are okay, little openness, little glass-nose perestroika version, a Chinese version of that, and everything's fine. And so very, very quietly, like on the third day, what happens is the leaders all of a sudden start getting rounded up quickly at night, quietly, right? Oops. And so the next day, when people show up, they say, "Where's Chang? I don't see him. He was here yesterday, and he was one of our. What happened to Chang? Well, Chang's gone bye. Chang's got his head bent over to his knees. That's what the Chinese love to do. They, bend your body over and force you to walk sort of hunched over, humiliated like. And so they round them all up, and that's how they handle these quote revolutions of democracy. So what I would advise the Ukrainians to do is watch out for the same sort of thing. Now, they think the Ukrainians are stupid, and the Ukrainian people aren't any more stupid than anybody else, but the leadership hopes they've been dumbed down. So they say, oh, look, a negotiated settlement. Oh, look, a standoff. Oh, look, everything's coming our way. Yes, we will remain vigilant. Yes, we're not stupid. The problem is the people have to sleep sometime, right? Even the leaders of the revolt in Kiev have to sleep. And that's when, secretly at night, tippy-toe, up come the Kiev secret police and say, come with us. And then, a day or two from now, people will start looking around and say, hey, we're our leaders of this revolt in Kiev. And then somebody starts secretly, frantically spreading, they got taken away last night. And so the rest of the people are supposed to become panicked, right? Oh, my God, secretly they got so-and-so, so I better shut up and hide, take a vacation to the Black Sea or get out of town, whatever. And so I would just, if you know anybody over there, just alert them to that possibility, that's what this is. It may not be, but it may be one of these strategic moves on the part of the ruthless secret police in the Ukraine who are allied with the secret police in Russia. Yes, they are still there. Yes, the KGB has just changed its name to protect the guilty, not the innocent. And so just watch it. All right, no more of that.
Well, let me just comment, Dennis, because I think it's so vitally important that people understand that if you read my books on the Brotherhood of Darkness, we go into the background of the financing of Russia in 1917, 1918, and we've financed the Russians all the way up until the time that the whole economy fell apart in 1990. And then what did we do? Why? Because we sent our drilling companies over there, about 6 or 8 drilling companies. We provided the funding. And we put down the oil wells and the gas wells so that Russia would have an income so they could continue being an enemy. You have to have an enemy, the best enemy money could buy. And then, of course, we can have this phony goings-on over there in the Ukraine. But what we do is we find the people who have the courage to take a stand against tyranny, and they're simply done away with because the last thing the people who want this world government is people who believe in freedom or have the integrity to do anything. But remember, we work very closely with Putin. We work very closely with the rulers of China. Why do you think we've given China all sorts of special trade benefits so that they can bring their products into us without tariffs, whereas we try to take our products over there while they have tariffs? We have the largest trade deficit with China, with any nation in the world. This isn't happening by accident. We're creating the best enemy money can buy, and when you understand that, things going on begin to make sense. Dr. Cuddy, go right ahead.
Not only did we go over there and assist them in deep drilling and oil and so forth, but by doing that, you enable them to have a tool that they could use against Europe. If Europe started to act up, then the Soviets could Russians could always say, behave, Europe, or we will cut off your gas or oil or whatever. So it's not only something to gin up the Russian economy, but it also could be used as a blackmail tool against Europe. And that's what the power elite does. They constantly do that. They play people against each other. You know, Catholics against Protestants for hundreds of years, Sunnis against Shia. West Germans against East Germans, communists against capitalists, Northern Irish against Southern Irish.
Don't forget the Democrats against the Republicans.
Oh yeah, the Democrats against the Republicans.
The right and the left. Go ahead.
Right and the left. Yeah, it's the old dialectical process, and the public, of course, has been dumbed down, so they never catch on. You would think there's a learning curve here somewhere, but the public never clues into this stuff. And so, speaking of jobs and what we've done, picking up on what you were just saying, they count on short-term memories. It's sort of like a politician will do something right after he's elected because he's convinced, and often rightly so, that by the time the next election cycle comes around in 4 years or whatever, the public will have forgotten, because they're really short-term memories. And so you remember how we were snookered into going along and passing NAFTA and GATT with the World Trade Organization, even though the public, like 75-80% in the polls, said we don't want NAFTA, we don't want GATT, but they did it anyway. Well, if you, this is what I say is the usefulness in looking at things today and comparing it back to something in the past. So, for example, back when the NAFTA was passed, the year before that, the U.S. ran a $1.6 billion trade surplus with Mexico. Okay, the year before NAFTA, a $1.6 billion trade surplus with Mexico. But a couple of years ago, just a little over a year ago, 2012, we ran a $64 billion deficit.
But remember, so they promised us, NAFTA was going to be good because it was going to make more jobs for the Americans. Well, I think maybe said more jobs. They didn't say for Americans. Basically, of course, what it did, the whole idea from the very beginning was to deceive the American people. We've lost about, well over 5 million manufacturing jobs. We only have about 10 million left. And they intend to destroy that as much as they can as they progressively impoverish the American people. Living standards are going down. More and more people are moving from the middle class into poverty. But don't you worry, the government's going to provide for you with food stamps and with housing allotments and with free medical care and until they run out of money. And then, of course, the whole thing's got to come toppling down. But then, of course, they'll come up with a new program. But go right ahead, Dennis.
Among the, NAFTA was supposed to create about, when it was passed, the projection was to create about 20,000 new high-tech American jobs. Yes, we're going to lose a lot of, service industry, but man, we're going to get them high-paying, high-tech jobs. So the projection was it would create about 20,000 new American jobs, high-tech jobs. But actually, by 2010, NAFTA had eliminated almost 700,000 U.S. jobs, and some in every state. Now, that's specifically identified from NAFTA. We've lost a lot more jobs than that, but specifically regarding NAFTA, what it has cost us is almost 700,000 jobs. And then it's not just NAFTA, because we have these really swift deals with people all over the place. And so a couple of years ago, 2012, there was the Korea-U.S. trade agreement. See, another great idea to get us a whole lot of jobs, right? And that one was supposed to be even better than NAFTA. We were supposed to create 70,000 new U.S. jobs. What happened? Well, we lost 40,000 U.S. jobs, specifically as relates to the Korea-U.S. trade agreement, right? And, to boot, the U.S. trade deficit increased by $5.8 billion. See, that's how we get all this economic success. We lost, $5.8 billion just from this handy-dandy Korea-U.S. trade agreement. Yeah. And so the American public is basically, dumb. So anyway, that's one economic view. The other thing is that's currently, and as I said, well, after the break, I'll tell how that relates to the future. So we look at the past, NAFTA. We look at now Korea. We look at the trade deficit increase. We look at the number of jobs lost. We lost more jobs, not gained more jobs. And after the break, I'll show how this relates to the future and how my predictions seem to be coming true.
And of course, the next thing is the Trans-Pacific Program.
Yep.
They have secret negotiations. Why are they secret? Nobody, certainly in Congress, is allowed to know. They're going to have an opportunity to vote for it, but they're not going to get a chance to see it ahead of time. They'll see it a couple of hours. The most disastrous certainly change in the structure of our society. TPP is coming up, and few people even understand. Go right ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, what you also find out is a lot of what we were just talking about is sneaky-like behind the scenes. For example, all of these free trade agreements, whether it's NAFTA or Korea or Trans-Pacific and so forth, when they're passed, the free trade agreements generally began under GATT. It's when they generally began. And it wasn't until those WikiLeaks, remember those famous few years ago, WikiLeaks came out, that we learned that the free trade agreements have planned to exempt corporations, including foreign corporations, from American laws governing trade disputes. Isn't that handy? They're exempt from our laws. Of course, that's what the World Trade Organization, which is a part of GATT, does. They rule against us 75% of the time. They actually force Congress to change our laws. And I put one specific example in my book, The Globalist, which came out about 14 years ago, in the year 2000, where the World Trade Organization made a ruling which forced us to change our laws. And when you do that, when an unelected bunch of people over in Europe can do that, then you no longer really are a completely sovereign nation. So anyway, just before the break, I said after the break, which is now, so what I'll do is get right to that, is oftentimes I look at the past, I look at what's going on now, and then I project what the plan is for the future, like the world currency, which I said, I looked at the past, where it was coming from, like Dr. Stan says, we funded the Soviet Revolution. In fact, William Boyce Thompson, who was a member of the Federal Reserve back then, put up $1 million of his own money. And back in 1917-ish, $1 million is big money now, but it was $50-100 million in real purchasing value today. So he puts up that much money of his own for the revolution over there. And so the history of this thing comes on along. And then you have the World Trade Organization as part of GATT and so on and so on. And so I try to connect the past, what's going on there, with what's going on currently, and then looking toward the future. And remember, I said that I didn't just sit here and ponder into outer space what was going to happen, but I looked at the cover of The Economist for January 9th of 1988, and on there it had a picture of the Phoenix. And it said, the article, the editorial page about the cover, said, pencil in the Phoenix for the year 2018, and that's when the world currency would come about. And I looked, ever since then, the gradual progress in my books, my various books. I put quotes since then, including during the last 3-4 years, where ministers of finance around the world would get together and say, yeah, it looks like maybe about 2018 we'll have a world currency. So the plan is in the works. And so I have been predicting for many, many months now, when people said, Obama is going to ruin things and the economy is going to crash. I said, no, not yet. And they said, well, if he's reelected, as soon as he's reelected, the thing will crash. I said, no, not yet. And sure enough, the stock market is still going up. But remember what I said, the stock market would be okay. Then you start to get, at around mid-year, you get a little inkling. By the end of the year, it starts to have really significant signs. And right after the election, you start to see the downward trend. And so I was talking to one security guard up at the grocery store where I am, and he's actually getting his doctorate in economics. And I think he's from Sierra Leone or one of these West African countries. And we talk from time to time. He said, well, what economic indicator...
Hold that thought. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and Dr. Cuddy is talking about the discussion with a security guard who's actually getting his degree in economics. He's from Africa, and basically he's over here working to get a degree in economics. And what was the substance of your conversation with this gentleman who's taking his degree in economics?
Yeah, he's getting his PhD in economics here, and he'll probably go back there and be some kind of big shot. Maybe I should keep in touch with the guy. But anyway, he typically said, well, what economic indicators do you have that suggest that? And I said, look, It doesn't happen like that. And I try to explain to him about the dialectic and how the big shots, the power elite, manipulate markets and how they'll drive the stock market up and drive it down and so forth. And he's nodding his head, and I told him, look at my News with Views column called Looming Economic Disaster, and look at another column I did on News with Views called Suckernomics. And he sort of chuckled. He liked that title. And so tonight, after we get off this program, I'm going to go up there and see him again because he works the night shift. And what I'll do is I'll say, you want some indicators? I'll give you an indicator. Now, it's not an official government indicator, but what I tell people to do is, when things don't seem to make sense, see how it fits into the power elite plan. And I've identified some power elite members. I've talked about David Rockefeller with his secret cabal, and I talked about George Soros. So what you can do, and what I'm going to hand this guy, is I'll say, okay, here's an indicator. And I've told him, people like Soros, watch what they do. Watch what they do. It's sort of like when Dr. Stan quotes the head of the CFR saying something. You say, oh, look what he said. This is what's coming. And that's right. That's right. So if you watch Soros, what he did was, and you can check this out. I'll give you the title if you wanted to check this stuff out. Now, back in 2010, there was a column, June 4th of 2010, and the title of it was The Real Story of How George Soros shorted, S-H-O-R-T-E-D, shorted the pound, etching his name into financial history forever. It's a long title. You don't have to Google all that. Just put Soros and shorted the pound. Soros, Google Soros, and they quote, shorted the pound. And what that does is say exactly how he sort of controlled the ebb and flow of the British economy. And, it gives specific things. The Bank of England's plan was to aggressively buy the pound in the hope that it would inspire confidence to stop speculators from destroying the currency. And then it goes to Germany's central bank began to attack Britain, calling for devaluation of the pound. Bullets, bing, bing, bing. And it's a really good instructive lesson as to what he did in 2010. Well, now, fast forward to today and the future. And this is why I think my predictions, if you watch this stuff, you can pretty well predict where things are going to be in the future. So now you're going to Google this, or at least look this. The Wall Street Journal, just 3 days ago, February 18th, had a column called George Soros Doubles Down on Bearish, like a bear, the animal bear, bearish market. There's a bullish market, means it goes up. Bearish means it goes down. Bearish bet. George Soros doubles down on bearish bet. And what that does is it begins, George Soros built a big bet at the end of last year, December, that the stock market was due for a tumble. A tumble. It's going up now. Everybody and their grandmothers out there, oh, look at the stock market. It's 1,500, 1,600. Whee! Good times are here again. From the 1920s. But if you watch Soros, he'll signal what's really going to happen in the future. So if you're interested in checking this stuff out, and why I still say the timetable that I set was, mid-year, you'll see a little iffiness. Right after the election, you'll see the definite indicators of a tumble down. And after the 2014 election, here we go on the slide. And by 2016, Barack Obama will probably wish he never was president, although he's a puppet. He's told what to do and not do anyway. He's not in control of anything. And so, and that's when, the public will say, well, let's get rid of them, and we'll alternate power like Carol Quigley wants us to do. And so the Republicans will come back in and, probably Jeb Bush with only a plurality, not an actual majority, will sort of sneak in there, and because, he's one of them. And, he's like his daddy and his brother and his granddaddy and all that stuff. So anyway, if you look at this, George Soros doubles down on bearish bet, you can get an indicator of what that's all about. Now, moving along as to how I am once again correct in the predictions, you might remember on April 15th, I said about 3 or 4 things the terrorists could do, and sure enough, within the next week, they did them, right? And then I indicated something about the our electrical grid, and there was something sort of related to it. And then last 2 weeks ago in the show we have now, Dr. Stan's Radio Liberty, I said, aha, looky what they did, and I was right after all. Well, once again, what I have done is on Monday I posted a column about these, 2 weeks ago, I had posted a column, and we talked on this program about these tubes on the airplanes exploding. No new terrorist threat in the tubes, right? And at that time, 2 weeks ago, I said yes, and, for example, cold cream jars. Cold cream jars. Well, guess what? Last night on ABC The World News Tonight, Diane
Hold the thought. Okay, go right ahead, Dennis.
Okay, just before that break, I had mentioned that I had in the past, in my April of this year column, News Reviews, talked about things that terrorists could do, and sure enough, just a couple of weeks ago, what they did was reveal something that happened in California back in April that they didn't tell people at the time. So in April, May, June, July, August, people didn't know this. But at that time, they actually had 17, I believe it was, Transformers hit with sniper rifles, putting a severe dent in the electrical grid. So once again, they cover up stuff. It's not just stuff that we know and what they tell us, but they cover up stuff which has happened, which I had said would happen, and sure enough, it does. And so what I was telling immediately before the break was that a couple of weeks ago they had this announcement about the threat of toothpaste tube bombs being used on these planes. And I said this was just like a psychological probe because they want the public dumbed down enough so the public doesn't say, well, if they could do this now and it's very simple to make, how come they haven't, done something with toothpaste tubes in grocery stores and pharmacies, Walmarts and Targets and all over the place, but they haven't. And at that time, 2 weeks ago, I mentioned, for example, not just toothpaste tubes, but I said cold cream jars. And sure enough, yesterday, Diane Sawyer came on and said, yes, new terrorist threat. It's been clarified, and now cold cream jars. So, either I'm getting this stuff right or the terrorists are sort of tapping into Radio Liberty or something. Maybe they're sitting over there in Yemen logging into Radio Liberty programs. I hope not. I'd imagine that they had more intelligence than that. But, hey, who knows? Maybe the terrorists have been dumbed down, too. Or, who knows, the Paralete may just be getting its instructions from me. Wouldn't that be a kick? Okay. So, anyway, once again, these predictions are basically correct. Another example of how the Paralete does these psychological probes and hopes that the public is too stupid to understand what's going on is all of the geniuses on ABC and CBS, and they're chuckling.
Hold that thought. We'll be back in just a moment here with Dr. Cuddy. Well, this is Dr. Cuddy, and this is Dr. Stan, our guest, Dr. Dennis Cuddy, and he's simply talking about the fact that certainly he had predicted some weeks ago, certainly that the terrorists would come down, they would start using the explosives in toothpaste and cold cream jars, and they've come up with this. But, ladies and gentlemen, there's really a threat from terrorism. Why don't we have a lot more terrorist attacks in America? In fact, just about every terrorist attack we've had, the government was right on top of it. In fact, their agents were working with the agent who was carrying this out. And ladies and gentlemen, the reason we're not having a lot of terrorist attacks here is because they need the financial and military power of the United States to bring about their one world government, and then we don't want to get the American people upset. The war on terrorism is as phony as a $3 bill. Most of the terrorists have been employed at one stage or another by our government or controlled by people who control our government, controlled by people who are paid by our government. The whole thing is phony. If there were really a threat, we would be having chaos in America like they're having over in Iraq today, but we're not seeing it here, and the reason we're not seeing it is because it's all contrived, and the last thing they want is for the people to get upset. They need our financial and military power to consolidate power throughout the world. We're financing the people on both sides in the Ukraine. We're financing the people, certainly the rebels in Syria who are killing Christians. Why are we financing the rebels in Syria who are killing the Christians? Because the people who control our government hate Christianity, and when you understand that, things begin to make sense. We're destabilizing the Middle East in preparation for a great war, but between the Sunni and the Shia Muslims. Dr. Cuddy, you pick up the story.
Do you mean to tell me that Osama bin Laden wasn't hauling his dialysis machine around from cave to cave over there planning all this stuff?
Osama bin Laden, as you know, is simply a front for the people to put him in power, the same people who control all the presidents. Go right ahead.
Okay. Yeah, in fact, there's a TV show just starting in the next few weeks, and it fits with this stuff. It's called Mind Games. It's a new network TV show. And on there, it has like a little intro, and it has one guy telling the other, he says, we're going to change people's minds without them knowing we've even done it. And I said, yeah, right. Like that hasn't already been going on. So anyway, one of the things, the psychological probe that they're doing is all the gurus of ABC's and NBC and CBS and all, they chuckle. You know, they've been chuckling right there on the air about Iran sending a ship over there. You know, we've got this fleet over in the Mediterranean and so on and so on. And they say, oh, look, I think one of these foreign policy experts on there said, yeah, a good trawler could take care of that Iranian ship. Ah, ha, 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 ha. What you're not supposed to do is ask yourself about that Iranian ship sort of off our coast. Like, what does it have on there? Forget, forget guns. What else might it have on that ship? How about a 1,000-year-old catapult that it flings a lot of its wasted uranium products into New York City from long range? They just assume that a ship is there and it's a normal ship, and we can just blow it out of the water and into the problem. The problem with that attitude is, as long as you're waiting to react to something, then by definition you allow them, whoever they are at any point in history, to act first. And unless you know in advance for sure what they're capable of doing, then you might be the victim. Yeah, we could blow the ship out of the water, but are we going to do that like tomorrow without any provocation? I doubt it. And so what if they do have some nasty, dirty bomb material on there? They don't have to get any intercontinental ballistic missile, right? Just a little old, rocket that you buy at your local sporting goods equipment, July 4th rocket. Okay, hey, let's modify this sucker, put a little super fuel on there, attach, we'll put about 5 or 6 of them together. We'll put a big old rubber band around the thing, and then we'll launch these dirty nuclear spent material, and hopefully it'll go 7 miles, and I think we get it that far, and boing, there goes Manhattan.
Well, of course, but the Iranians have ballistic missiles. They have sophisticated ballistic missiles. In fact, John Kerry is demanding that they give up their ballistic missiles, as well as their effort, of course, to develop nuclear weapons. And basically, of course, I don't think the Iranians are going to do that. I don't think that, in fact, I really suspect they already have nuclear weapons. I was told 20 years ago by a key person in government that the Iranians had nuclear weapons at that time. But the last thing they want is for the American people to realize that we do face very real threats today. Keep everybody happy, watching television, watching the latest NFL game or baseball game or basketball game. Keep the people entertained while, of course, they continue their progressive march towards the one world government, the one world financial system with the destruction of our economic system, the impoverishment of our people, and the destruction of Christianity. Go right ahead, Dennis.
The Iranians have ballistic missiles and long-range ballistic missiles, but the point I'm trying to make is, even some thug ruling Baluchistan or something, all he has to do is get some boat, and he just sits out there about 7 miles off of the coast of New York, and he has this little rocket thing that he's purchased at some cheap disposal place that has leftover stuff from their national holiday, and it's fairly easy to get some dirty nuclear material and stick it on one of these little rockets and zap it into New York City. I mean, I'm oversimplifying it, but the point is we should not take anything like an Iranian ship sitting off of our coast as some kind of joke. It may not be a joke. It may be that the Iranians do have some nasty little thing on there and some nasty little rocket that could go the minimal, 7 miles. It's no big deal. And once you dirty up the Manhattan, okay, so you don't kill, 1 million people. Big deal. You can create a lot of havoc if you just get a rocket with some dirty nuclear material to explode in the middle of Manhattan. It's just that simple. So anyway, The last thing I'll say is, of course, there's the secret Nazi plan, and that's my next to last book, which is part of the larger Power Elites plan. And what they do is, like I said, sort of psychological probes. And what you want as part of the secret Nazi plan, of course, he picked up from Margaret Sanger, who got her money and funding all from the Rockefellers and all this eugenics movement, which was around in the early part of the 1900s. I think they had their first International Eugenics Congress in 1912, and you had Charles Eliot there, head of Harvard. And it was a lot of big names. And Woodrow Wilson had one of these forced sterilization laws when he was governor of New Jersey, and all of these people were really into eugenics. And so, as part of that, you would have a euthanasia program, and the Nazis basically learned from us, or picked it up from us. And so what you would do is like Terry Schiavo in Florida, but you do it on a national scale. So you do a Terry Schiavo, and that sets the precedent. The American public goes, oh my, isn't that awful? But they allow it to happen, see, which they didn't have to allow to happen. Jeb Bush did not have to allow that to happen, just like he didn't have to allow Elian Gonzalez to be returned to Castro, which is what Castro said you're doing. You're not returning to Elian, to his father, you're returning it to me, the dictator of Cuba. And so what you do on an international scale is you use a single country. And so the first country here is for children. So you got to euthanize and be able to euthanize everybody, not just grandma, not just granny, or the 35-year-old who is now incapacitated, can't do anything. So what happened is this past December, the Belgium Senate passed a bill that will extend euthanasia to children with disabilities. Get it? I mean, this is like, the Nazis are, like I said, it's the fulfillment of the secret Nazi plan. They said perhaps 2 generations. So the psychological probe is, let's get a country, in this case it's Belgium, and let's get the governmental body, the Senate, say, okay, now we're going to euthanize children with disabilities. Okay, so picture yourself, there's Belgium, there's a hospital in Antwerp, there's a child, he has disabilities, okay, he's gone. And why is that different from Nazi Germany? It's not different from Nazi Germany. And so that's why I say the fulfillment of the secret Nazi plan was perhaps 2 generations, which is now. Okay, so I've rattled off about 5 or 6 things, and once again, we're practically at the end of the program, and we haven't gotten to the book. But I just think it's important to show how all of this, and the book, not only the secret Nazi plan, Power Elite, the Secret Nazi Plan is available from Radio Liberty, but also the Power Elite, Their History and Future, my most recent book, available from Radio Liberty, isn't just sort of a lesson in history. It's not just that, somebody did something with the Illuminati or the Knights Templar. It shows the progression coming up to today and then looking toward the future. And so the chapter in the book with the last about 10 minutes that we got that we're on now, the Power Elite, Their History and Future, as I said, is called The Power Elite's Use of Misdirection. And this is one of their primary mechanisms that they will use to accomplish the goals. And if you look historically, many people have been, let's say, misdirected into believing that the American Civil War was fought over the existence of slavery in the South. Okay, Civil War, we're going to free the slaves, that's why we had the Civil War. Well, actually, only about 7% of Southerners, the Deep South, the 11 Deep South Southern states, owned slaves at the time of the war. But as I said in one of my earlier News with Views columns, and in my book about the secret Nazi plan, I related that the Power Elite's tactic of promoting an issue, let's say the abolition of slavery, that would split the U.S. So the Power Elite could create a Gulf empire consisting of the southern states along with Central America and the Caribbean islands. And so, without going into all the details, I put the details in the book so that you can see that's what was really happening. They wanted that issue, abolition of slavery, that would divide the North and the South. And so they went through that whole process. I specifically put a speech from 1809 by the British emissary from Canada, and he's talking in Massachusetts. And so he's developing the strategy, and then come up to the time of the beginning of the Civil War, and Lincoln has appointed John Lothrop Motley as his minister to Vienna, and he's gone over to England, and he's riding home from England before he gets to Vienna back to his mother, and he says, Mom, I've uncovered this conspiracy. They want to divide the North and the South and create this Gulf Empire, which means the deep southern states joined with Central America and the Caribbean islands, as he said, quote, to have unlimited Negroes producing unlimited cheap products, end quote. And, of course, when that didn't pan out exactly, they had to have come up, with NAFTA and so forth, unlimited Hispanics. And then you have GATT, and you have the, global economy, so you have unlimited Chinese, unlimited Bangladeshis, unlimited everybody producing unlimited cheap products, apparently except for Americans, we lose our manufacturing jobs. So that we could be impoverished, because all of this is one big leveling process. I drive our wages down, the rest of the world comes up, and isn't this nice? And that's what David Rockefeller, with his secret cabal, has been up to, conspiring against the best interest of the United States, quote unquote. And in another news with column, I put another example of misdirection, and that's about the Cuban Missile Crisis. As I said, it's presented as one thing. And in this case, the Soviets actually wanted us to see that they had placed these long-range nuclear missiles in Cuba so that we would demand their removal, and that they would agree to comply in exchange for our assurance there would be no further attempts by us to invade Cuba. And the guarantee, of course, would enable them, the Soviets, to use Cuba then as a communist revolutionary training ground for all of Latin America, like Nicaragua and Africa. Not just Latin America, Nicaragua, but Africa. They specialized in Angola. They just get a beachhead. You start in Angola, and then you spread. All right. Now, in my book mentioned above, in this chapter, which is the secret Nazi plan, I had described how Eleanor Dulles, she's the sister of Alan and John Foster Dulles, had discovered information about Nelson Rockefeller working with the Nazis, and that was used to coerce him, Nelson, into agreeing to deliver the Latin American block of votes. This would be in the UN. For the establishment of the nation of Israel, and that would be in exchange for the Israelis not pursuing escaped Nazis after the Second World War, or blabbing about Nelson and the Dulles boys and their corporate buddy heads who had done all these nasty shenanigans working with the Nazis.
And I think it's so important people understand that probably between 10 and 30,000 Nazis escaped to South America in something called the Rat Line, but Adolf Hitler escaped there too, and the Jews never went after them because they had this secret agreement. Yep. They could have Israel, certainly, or they could go after the Nazis, which did they want, but they couldn't do both. And they decided they wanted Israel, and so they left them. There were only two, I think, in South America, Klaus Barbie and certainly Adolf Eichmann, that were ever tracked down. Why do you think the Jews didn't go after the Nazis? Very simply because they were told they could have Israel or they could have the Nazis, and so they choose Israel. Go ahead.
Yeah, technically, only Adolf Eichmann fell into that category, and then there was such a stink they didn't do it again until Klaus Barbie. But Klaus was right after. Nelson Rockefeller died in 1979, so they didn't get Klaus until the early 80s. And even he wasn't taken back there. He was called the Butcher of Lyon, which is in France. And so, there were two, but actually only Adolf Eichmann. So anyway, but I think personally that this may have been an example of misdirection again, because my question in the book that I raised is, do you really believe the Dulles brothers were so clumsy as to leave carelessly around such information laying about for their sister to find? I sort of doubt that. Oh, look, we forgot our stuff. It's on the tea table so Eleanor can find it. And so what I said is perhaps this was actually an example of misdirection, and the guarantee of non-pursuit of Nazis after World War II was the goal all along, because such non-pursuit was critical to the fulfillment of the secret Nazi plan. So that's what I think they really wanted all along. So this is another example, I think, of misdirection. You point one way, it looks like something is going on for this particular reason, but it's really for another. And at this point, I think it's important to remember that in the 1950s, the Egyptian president, Gamal Abdel Nasser, he discovered that the Muslim Brotherhood, which has been in the news the last couple of years, which had allied with the Nazis beginning in the 1930s, had already in the 50s been infiltrated by American and other intelligence agencies. And Nasser, and remember this, Nasser had been helped by over 100 Nazi veterans subcontracted by the CIA. Remember that now. The Nazis, veterans, subcontracted by the CIA, were helping NASA in the 50s. And so in 1957, he has that famous statement that Dr. Stan has related to you, where he says, quote, "The genius of you Americans is that you never make clear-cut stupid mistakes, only complicated stupid moves, which make us wonder at the possibility that there may be something we're missing."
And I think what Dr. Cuddy said is so vitally important. The Muslim Brotherhood was infiltrated by the American intelligence. The American intelligence was working with the Muslim Brotherhood. It always has, going back certainly to the time immediately after the Second World War. And they're working with them today. Why? Well, you can't have a war unless you have an enemy, can you? The best enemy American intelligence money could buy. We'll be back in just a moment to wrap up the program. Our guest has been Dr. Dennis Cuddy. Dennis, we've got 3 minutes for you to wrap up the program.
Okay, well, I'll just make a couple more comments from this chapter about the power elite. And to the extent, as Dr. Stan has said, the American government has been the primary enforcer of the power elite's will over the last several decades. You need to be suspicious about what they're doing. The power elite from North Africa over to Afghanistan as part of the secret Nazi plan, which is a sub-part of their larger plan. For example, Egyptian President Morsi, who is now behind these glass, like in this glass cage where he can't talk, was part of this. But, you know, we build them up, we tear them down. We build up Gaddafi, we take him out. We build up Saddam Hussein, we take him out. Same thing with Afghan President Hamid Karzai. All of these people, including American presidents, are basically puppets. Obama's a puppet, Bush is a puppet, all of this. So that the power elite can, as I would say, pull the strings of his puppets, presidents have monitors. And so that's another thing I try to look at. You have Colonel Edward Mandell House. He monitored the activities of Woodrow Wilson. I also asked, do you really believe Hillary Clinton just happened to meet Bill Clinton at the library at Yale University? I think she was a handler. Also, do you really believe that Huma Abedin just happened to be the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton's Deputy Chief of Staff, when Abedin has 3 family members associated with organizations having ties to the Muslim Brotherhood? Likewise, do you really believe Valerie Jarrett just happens to be perhaps the closest advisor to President Obama, and she was born in Iran in 1956 to a father who was in Iran from 1950 to 1961, which perhaps coincidentally, maybe, includes the time the CIA was overthrowing Iranian leader Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953? Do you really believe power elite agent Zbigniew Brzezinski just happens to be an advisor to President Obama? And Brzezinski, after advising President Jimmy Carter to support the Ayatollah Khomeini following the Shah's abdication in 1979, recently has been strongly advising President Obama not to take military action against Iran to prevent it from developing a nuclear weapon, even though Israel is informed that they believe their existence may depend upon such action. So anyway, that's the place I am in this particular chapter, the power elite's use of misdirection. And we'll pick up next time. All
right, fine. Well, I guess has been Dr. Dennis Cuddy. His book is The Power Elite, their future and their history and their future. God bless. We'll talk to you next week at the same time.
Thanks for having me.
God bless. Bye-bye.
You too.
While the storm clouds gather far across the sea, let us swear allegiance to a land that's free.
Well, this is Dr. Stan, and let me suggest that if you really want to understand what's going on, you need to read Dr. Cuddy's books. I consider him the foremost historian of our times. We carry his books, The Power Elite and the Secret Nazi Plan. We carry his book on suddenly the Power Elite, their history and their future. And we have several other books by him that are available. Just give us a call at 1-800-544-8927. 1-800-544-8927, and understand that most of what you believe is not true, that most of what you read in the newspaper is not true, that the media is controlled. We have a wonderful book on that, written by a left-wing professor, Professor Ben Bagdikian, who from the University of California in Berkeley School of Journalism there, and he studied the media control for 30 years. The book, The New Media Monopoly. You need to get the book. You need to read the book. book, you need to understand that they create our reality through television, through radio, through books, through newspapers, and they largely control what the American people think and believe. But certainly this small little clique that we talk about is using the financial and military power of the United States to bring about a world government. Why are we suddenly financing the rebels in Syria when the rebels there are killing and raping and murdering the Christians and burning the Christian villages? Why are we supporting the people who are killing the Christians? Why, for the same reason. Of course, we've installed governments under Sharia law in both Afghanistan and Iraq. The people there do not want governments under Sharia law. They're Muslims. They don't want their governments to be imposing Sharia law, but that's what we have done. Oh, well, we say they're Muslim countries. They need Sharia law. This is not what they want. But we are in the process of destabilizing the whole world with your tax money, and one day America is going to be held responsible for what we're doing. And the good people of America are responsible not for what they do, but because of what they don't do, because men and women become accomplices to the evils they fail to oppose. Men and women become accomplices to the evils they fail to oppose. And ladies and gentlemen, we're financing certainly the rebels, certainly over in Kiev, and certainly then, of course, what you're seeing over in the Ukraine today is a battle between Russia and the United States. We're financing the rebels on one side. Russia's financing the government on the other side. But you need to get my book, Brotherhood of Darkness. That's Brotherhood of Darkness, to understand we're also working very closely with the Russians, but we don't want the American people to understand that. We're working very closely with the Chinese leaders. Why do you think we give them special breaks as far as bringing their products into America? They can bring their products in here with little or no tariffs. When we try to take our products into China, very, very high tariffs there. So we have a massive trade imbalance with communist China. We have a trade deficit of at least $500 billion a year. We have certainly a national deficit of $1 trillion a year, and ladies and gentlemen, you can't continue spending money that you don't have. They're having to borrow money to give out the money for food stamps and for Social Security and Medicare. We are running a deficit. Well, they claim it's only going to be $600 billion this next year, but then they consistently lie. And you don't remember a year from now what they said this year? Barack Hussein Obama, under his regime. Remember, Barack Hussein Obama is simply a figurehead for the power elite. But Barack Hussein Obama has increased the federal deficit from $10.7 trillion to $7.3, now $7.4 trillion in a matter simply of 5 years. It's gone from 10.7 to 17.3, now $17.4 trillion, essentially in a little over 5 years. The whole idea is to bankrupt America. We're already bankrupt morally. We're already bankrupt spiritually. They've infiltrated our churches. They've changed the music of our churches. You notice how the music has changed? And how the message of the church has changed? And how most ministers will not speak out about the political issues or certainly the satanic forces working at the highest levels of our government. Please pray for Radio Liberty, our provision, and our protection.